Welcome back to the students. I'm here with Oliver Habryka, who's these days running LessWrong, I think, and running Lighthaven.
That's right.
Both projects that are very interesting at the cutting edge of certainly AI discourse, rationality discourse, a lot of very interesting things going on over there. This is a community that I've been involved in peripherally throughout the years. I think I first got involved in 2011, and you rebooted the whole thing in, what, 2017?
Yeah, 2016, 2017.
2016, 2017. And yeah, it's been going very well for you over there. So I wanted to talk to you about the problem of building high quality intellectual community. This is something we're obviously very interested in with the students, but you've done a great job of it.
Thank you.
Obviously not solely, there's many other very intelligent, talented
I luckily
people
got
over
to
there.
inherit a lot of stuff that other people have built, Eliezer built. Yeah.
I think Eliezer obviously is the final credit on the matter, but yeah, so I'd love to just hear more about what got you on to the problem. Yeah. I mean, let's go back to 2015 maybe, right? So like when I was there in LessWrong, 2011, you know, I read the stuff, it was amazing. It's kind of this like huge eye-opening new worldview for, you know, an ambitious young man who's intellectually inclined. I think many people have gone through that experience, and very interesting stuff. But, you know, maybe by 2013, I'd gotten a little bored. I think maybe many people had gotten a little bored. The community had started to go into something of a decline in posting, at least. And by 2015, 2016, were you thinking about rebooting this, or how did that actually happen?
Yeah, I think the big thing that you're missing here, and that's of course the weirdest part of this whole story. Well, you know, there are many weird parts of the story, but one of the weirdest parts of the whole story is, of course, Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality.
Ah, yes.
And that was actually in between those states. Like, you know, 2011 is, I think, when kind of Eliezer wrote a lot of these essays that made the core of LessWrong. And then around, you know, 2013, 14, 15 is when he started publishing Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. And that, I mean, like, a kind of hilariously, enormously successful. Like if you showed up at MIT or any of the other top universities, like in the US in the technical degrees, like would just obviously be the most popular book, and it's like easily made.
Which is, I know, it's just absurd, right? It's a Harry Potter fan fiction, but this is very much Eliezer's style.
That's right. And so in some sense, actually, the most like active years, like up until, you know, then much later, kind of the last 2 years, like the most active years of LessWrong's history were 2015. Because that was when Eliezer was kind of publishing the final chapters of Harry Potter, of Rationality, and then like tons of the internet showed up, and just like, I mean, this was around the time when I found all of this. It's like 2014.
That's when you got it.
Well, actually for me, it's something like 2013 is when I kind of found it. Via Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. And then that was the peak. And then actually around that time, related to, God of all things, Roku's Basilisk.
Right.
He got like tired of moderating LessWrong, didn't really want to do all, you know, handle the online mobs that were constantly out for blood, and then took a step back. And around the same time, there were just a bunch of people who had gotten like really triggered and just like really tried to destroy the site. There was a specific user called Eugene Nia.
Right. Well, actually, I remember at that time in general, 2015, like you're talking about online mobs trying to like.
That's right. It was also like peak like.
This was. I remember being on Twitter at that time with my friends, and like we're sitting around, and it's like, this is completely unsustainable. Right. Like we need to get off of this hellscape of Twitter where everyone's insane. You know, like there's crazy people from 8chan trying to come after us. It's like there's all kinds of weird stuff going on at that time, and then so we sort of. Ended up retreating into like private Slacks and stuff, right? But and you know, some of the intellectual crowds that later became things like Palladium. Yeah. But it sounds like you had a similar experience then at that time, just this kind of sense of siege and craziness.
That's right. And then kind of LessWrong, you know, just solidly died like between 2015 and like early 2017 of just like activity levels went to approximately zero. Oh,
so it didn't like taper off from 2012.
That's right. It was like peaked in 2015.
There was a peak.
And there was of course a large distributional shift. There's like many arguments on LessWrong about how do we feel about all the fan fiction fans who are here. Right. But I think I think it ultimately succeeded at just attracting a lot of really good people combined with a bunch of quite weird fan fiction fans.
Yeah. Well, actually, before we go further, why don't we, I mean, many of the audience are going to know what LessWrong is, but why don't we give a little bit of a perspective on from our perspective, especially from your perspective, what is LessWrong? Yeah. Like, I remember when I showed up, it described itself as a community dedicated to human rationality. How do you see it? What is LessWrong?
I mean, LessWrong is like, one of the ways to think about it is like, it's a place where the rationality community got started. It's a place where
What's rationality?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's what I was going to go into next. It's like, rationality community got started, and it did so by Eliezer, writing originally kind of a long series of essays, originally on overcoming bias, together with Robin Hanson,
at Robin
and kind of the
Hanson's
GMU economists and a bunch of them. And then eventually they, told him to get his own apartment and get his own place because he was outgrowing overcoming bias, and then he founded LessWrong, and populated it with the essays that he had written, but then kind of opened it up to lots of other people.
Right.
And kind of, what is the rationality community is a question, always very difficult. It's like it's now many tens of thousands of people community all across the world with like a pretty complicated and thick ideology and worldview that's like very hard to summarize in a few things. But I think like, as I've been thinking more about this, and like more and more people have been asking me over the years this question of like, what is the rationality community?
Right.
I think like, if I had to break it down to like two core attributes of like what defines the rationality community, I would be like, number one is like, it's a bunch of people who are just like really kind of pretty obsessed with like the truth, like pretty obsessed with like
and how to get there.
And how to get there. It's like epistemology is like a term that gets thrown around every day, and like fundamental epistemology, and like people are very deeply obsessed with honesty, of just like what does it mean to be honest? How are we honest to each other?
Yeah.
And then a second thing, which I think often gets forgotten, but is actually like really important if you want to understand like most of the dynamics in the community, is that it's trying to be scope sensitive. Like it's like really obsessed with trying to figure out what are the biggest things that matter in the world. And just like people who are like trying to take a perspective on the world and be like, what are the things that will matter? And like kind of having a sense that like most things probably don't matter. Like there's only a few things to pay attention to that like will determine the course of history, that will like determine the success of like an individual's life. And so like those two things, I think, kind of explain most of what is going on. It's like it's a community that are deeply obsessed with the truth and deeply obsessed with like trying to identify the big things that really
and then of course there's all the particular heritage of it coming out of kind of, I don't know, internet transhumanist discourse, the whole AI current.
That's right.
Obviously.
But I think like both of those are like very well explained by kind of those two core things. It's like, why is it AI? Like, why is the community so obsessed about AI? And you're just like, well, number one, AI is just like really interesting if you're trying to understand like how to better like arrive at true beliefs, because it's just like mechanistically the domain that you would want to study. It's like, how do you quantify and operationalize truth seeking? But also it's just the big thing. Like if I think almost any futurist who like was worth their salt like any time, in the 2000s, like if they were trying to predict which things will matter, I think they would have been catastrophically dumb if they hadn't put AI into their top 5.
Right.
And so just like, obviously that will show up. Just like,
I mean, just to make that even sharper, I understand that Eliezer got onto rationality and created the rationality community as part of his AI efforts. Like he was pursuing these AI questions, trying to study how do you build a being who can think. And then that obviously leads to a lot of engagement with the problem of how do you actually come to the truth and all this. And then also he was trying to kind of get other people to think about this. He thought, okay, how can I make them think better? And so this is sort of the original genesis of the Rationality project.
That's right. And so that's the Rationality community. And then LessWrong kind of was on the internet kind of the place where it formed, and like kind of Eliezer opening up, other people posting, and that early Scott Alexander and Slate's Codex were like that's where it got born, and like Scott started posting under his username Evane, and then that kind of gave rise to that whole branch of the community. And now one of the also, would you describe it quite exactly the same as the Rationality community? Unclear, but definitely one of the biggest intellectual influences and movements that exists out there right now.
It's definitely influential. Let's go back then to the matter of, that drop off, 2015 to 2017. The arrival of the Eternal September of fan fiction types killed the thing off, dead. Maybe I'm editorializing. What actually happened there?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely it wasn't the fan fiction people. Fan fiction people were great.
Okay.
It was mostly just the trolls. Like there was this one guy called Eugene Nia who was just like creating thousands of sock puppets account every day and just like downvoting everyone he didn't like, and just like He had like a specific thing. It's like he was kind of slightly like alt-right vibed. Like he really hated anyone who was like social justice-y or like had anything remotely to do. Like he like tried to identify like any user that might possibly be trans and just like try to mass downvote them and a bunch of other stuff.
God,
like he was like super triggered.
So just kind of the general online culture war apocalypse of that time.
That's right. But combined with just like specific technical problems, just like it was an old fork of the Reddit code base.
Yeah.
And it just didn't have any good moderation tools. And
Right,
just
it had
like
vulnerabilities to
and
that.
then you had like some moderators, like Eliezer took a step back, and then you had some part-time moderators, and they didn't want to deal with like clicking delete on like 500 new accounts every day. Were the only option to moderate the space. And so I think kind of it died out of a mixture of technical reasons and like the fact that just like there wasn't a good, there was no admins who were actually putting in all the effort to like moderate and cultivate a culture.
So then at some point in there, like as I understand it, you and maybe others, I don't know the details of the story, came to the conclusion that this was not something that could be accepted.
That's right.
That this community or this place was too important to let it just die to trolls and chaos. And so you undertook a project to kind of reboot it. How did that happen? Why you, like, who else sort of had that idea? What was that conversation?
Yeah, so kind of there was kind of a passing down through a few hands of like moderators. And then eventually Matthew Graves, Vannevar, was kind of declared benevolent dictator for life. I think he had kind of been an active user on the site and had done a bit of moderation, but I think largely people were like, well, look, I think someone should be authorized and given the power to do something. But he was mostly half-time, didn't really do very much, was kind of pretty skeptical that the site was really going to survive in the long run, was thinking of turning it into a read-only archive. And then I think it was like New Year's Eve 2016, where I approached him and was like, I think this is unacceptable. What are we doing? Like, we're just letting the central hub of like our ecosystem and community die. What idiots are we? And then he was like, okay, yeah, I think I want to give you a shot. I want to give you like the option of like creating an alternative. And then I got his blessing. And then I just like for the next few months, just like built kind of the whole. I was a terrible programmer. I was still enrolled in my computer science degree at UC Berkeley. I had done some programming, like I'd founded a web design and web development company in Germany where I had done some, simple front-end web development. But that was a much bigger project that I was taking off, just like building a whole modern forum software from scratch.
Yeah,
and then I did that.
There's actually a lot to it.
That's great. And then I built that kind of over the next 6 to 9 months. I wouldn't say my code was great. And then we had a big vote where just like we started kind of the LessWrong 2.0 beta. People could join. And then we had a big vote where just like Miri, who kind of, a Machine Intelligence Research Institute, which Eliezer founded, they kind of owned LessWrong as kind of the platform owners. And they were like, well, either we can transfer ownership kind of to Ollie, or we can shut it down and turn it into a read-only archive. And then we put it up to a vote on which of the two we want to do to the high karma users. And that was then kind of when the official passing of the torch happened.
Right.
And
then this is the genesis, or did you incorporate at that time as, what was it, Lightcone?
So we actually were fiscally sponsored by the Center for Applied Rationality up until like 2023.
Okay,
like,
so until
long
quite
time.
recently.
Just was really nice of them, and they had a charity, and they were just like, yep, this is compatible with our charitable objectives. So
right, of course, yeah, it makes sense.
And none of us paid ourselves any real salaries until like 2021 or something. So it's like
right. It was just a labor of love.
That's right.
Yeah, one of the big questions that people often ask in makeovers like that is like, why new software? Like, why not fix the old Reddit code base, or use something else, use something off the shelf? What was your thinking process in that? Like, I know certainly new software has the opportunity for many like adjustments of making it just right for the particular epistemic community and so on. I wonder how much you took advantage of that. How much was that on your mind?
I mean, the very key thing is just that there didn't exist anything on the internet that was oriented around long-form collaborative writing. I'm just like, where would you have gone? Like, there are tons and tons of places that are online forums, and those were like all deeply oriented around this ephemeral kind of content. And I think this is just like what you saw in the whole internet across that period.
Right.
Like, that was kind of the death of like the blog and the rise of the social media network. Yeah. And with the rise of the social media network, like everything by default became ephemeral and short. Yeah. And like only with the rise of Substack did you actually start seeing anyone investing kind of at an infrastructure level into long-form content again.
Yeah, or Medium, I think also. But
yeah, I mean, Medium was kind of at the time of course, I couldn't have used Medium. That was a proprietary closed
Yeah.
system. But also, I think that was around a time when Medium like kind of was already obviously becoming corrupt. Like
Right.
you kind of like it started out with like being this great platform for blogging. And then I think at some point they just like started, like I had multiple friends who had all their content on Medium, and then Medium just like paywalled their content. And we're like, have to pay to access the essays that you wrote here. And just like, it ran into a giant monetization issue.
Right.
And so I think that just like that wasn't a business model that anyone was pursuing, and definitely not in an open source fashion. And so we did technically start from a code base that like was kind of some random open source project that a guy from Japan called Sasha had started that was like, an open source forum code base. It was a terrible code base. Shouldn't have started with it, honestly. It hurt me more than it benefited me, even given my bad programming skills at the time. But yeah, there was just nothing that you could have done.
Okay.
And you could have started with the old Reddit code base, but that one was just like Reddit started as open source and then became closed source. So you would have already started with an 80-year out-of-date code base.
Right.
And that was just like, that would have been a terrible choice.
And okay, so in the course of revitalizing it, obviously there's this whole software half of it, but there's also a very social component to that. Like, how do you take something that has kind of run out of steam? Like, I assume it had run out of steam not just because of the trolling and the difficulties with moderation, but also the community had sort of scattered.
That's right. The community,
the energy had gone. Right. Like, how did you get that back? How do you actually take something that had existed and make it anew or regather everyone? What was that process like?
I mean, a lot of it, like a huge amount of effort went into just consistently signaling that somebody will be there to like take care of anything you invest into this community and invest into this ecosystem,
right?
And like will curate it for you. And so like a big commitment that I made, there was just like one that I fought for many months about, but about a few months into the project, I started reaching out to old core contributors, and I was like, I will do this for 5 years.
Right.
Like, I already care so much about the content that is already on LessWrong and like what is there and what has been written in its archives, that I will promise that I will keep care, like take care of anything that is posted on LessWrong in terms of not letting it get destroyed by trolls, in terms of doing moderation on it, and not letting the culture become toxic for the next 5 years. I'm just like, even if that like means that it's just me in a basement, like with no money and like low activity levels on the side, like maybe I will at some point start taking a different job, but I will make sure that like if there's content that I will like preserve it and make sure that it's like continues to stay readable and like well presented, and as the internet shifts, it can adapt to those changes.
So just sending that signal of someone is actually home, this place is actually maintained. Your investment is safe here, basically.
And like one of the big components of this was design. Like I think just like one of the things that LessWrong did kind of to the whole Rationality community, which I'm very proud of, is I do think we kind of, I don't know, I don't want to be like too like self-aggrandizing here, but I do think we taught the rationalist community style. Like there's like a sense in which like I think I'm just very proud of LessWrong's design. And a lot of effort went into just like making the website feel nice and making it feel cared for and making it be a place that like communicates like a whole visual aesthetic. Like
the LessWrong 2.0 definitely has a style. Yeah. It looks better than the original. Yeah. It looked very polished. It was very nice.
And it also just like tried to kind of define a whole literary genre. Like I've become very obsessed over the years with like an aesthetic defines in many ways like a whole way of relating to the world, and like what literary genre do you fall into. And I've like fought a lot over the years of trying to refine this aesthetic that's like somewhere at a mixture of like when it came to stuff like fonts, like I looked into like what are fonts that are like most interestingly evocative of like a mixture of like modern scientific notation and like Renaissance like writing and like things that feels like it kind of evokes the correct kind of scholarly spirit. And at the same time trying to invoke like some of the more modern components around AI, and trying to create this mixture of like, this is a community that like is rooted in deep scholarship, this is a community that is also at the same time pursuing like ambitious, bold like technology and trying to merge with that. And so just a lot of time went into that aesthetic, and I think that just contributed quite a lot, just like people being excited about it, because then they could get a better intuitive sense of what it would mean to participate and be on there.
Right, and that's you just sitting there kind of researching these things and thinking about them, talking to people about them.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the design was you?
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So, and I remember like even just the logo, right?
Yeah.
The compass logo is kind of like, what is this thing about? It's about navigation, right?
That's right.
And the whole map kind of
That's
motif
right, yes.
that gets used a lot. You've used the map motif quite a lot.
That's right.
In the even just in the publications you did of the old essays
That's
and so on, but also just aesthetically throughout it. And obviously it's conceptually very core to the rationality thing, map and territory kind of idea. Yeah, so you kind of pulled people back on just with this commitment that, look, this place exists, someone's investing in it, it's going to be in competent hands, it's safe to be here. Like, how much of it is just that versus like, did you have to really like prod people to post again?
Oh, totally.
Or,
I mean, I did like, there was like,
what
we
was
made
the whole process?
And early on, we were just like hustling everything. Just like the whole kind of ecosystem had like dispersed over this diaspora. So I would like almost every day be like, somebody I respect who was previously posting on LessWrong was now posting on a random blog. And I'd just be like, finding the post, link posting on LessWrong, copy pasting the whole content into the website, sending them a DM being like, hey, by the way, I copy pasted your whole content onto LessWrong. Let me know if you didn't want that. And just like lots of, I think that was good. Mostly people liked that, but like asking for forgiveness instead of permission on just consolidating and pulling back all the content.
Not getting them to post it themselves, but just posting it on their behalf.
And then just being like,
the keys.
hey, can I just like one of the first features that I shipped that is like automatic RSS cross-posting, which is like, you can, like, this is like, as an admin, I can just make it so whenever you post something on your blog, you also post it to LessWrong with its full content.
Right, yeah, you just make that automatically.
Make it so that everything gets consolidated into one place again. And that was just a huge amount of hustling and just like messaging people and like encouraging them to post on the site again and doing like lots and lots of talking and user interviewing and figuring out how we can help them.
Through that process and since then, how much, I mean, I assume you've thought a lot about the epistemic norms. I know you've added things like the second kind of component of upvoting and downvoting, like for agreement and disagreement as opposed to quality. So there's various things you've done, obviously, in thinking through kind of how the epistemic norms kind of, how the rubber meets the road on those. Can you say a bit more about that? Like, was it just kind of continuing the old sort of actually existing rationalist norms and LessWrong norms? Did you have to do a lot of innovation there? Did you have to revamp anything? Like, how do you think about it in terms of actually curating the intellectual community, not just kind of getting people to post on the platform?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big ones, and that was actually kind of a thing that was true about every other social media platform at the time where we had to build some new software, is, for example, like upvoting and downvoting. Really, really important tool. Yeah. And in particular, just the whole internet at the time, I think for reasons I could go into, that's like a really interesting sociological study, but everything was moving towards upvote only.
Well, because you'd get brigaded downvotes.
You would get brigaded downvotes, but also it's just...
They don't like negative feedback.
That's right. People don't like negative feedback, and it marked a shift in communities. Like if you have lower trust communities, like allowing negative voting, like now suddenly produces very different dynamics.
Right.
But like allowing both upvoting and downvoting allows a certain kind of like coordinating around. In particular, it allows you to punish bad behavior, which is like you can't
in relatively subtle ways.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the stereotype of the Redditor is like they just vote anything they disagree with, and like you end up with this hive mind consensus kind of thing. That's right. And so I assume you thought about that and kind of adding new dimensions. And how did you overcome that problem?
I mean, so one of the big ones that I think is like Reddit, it really sucks, like to try to maintain a culture on Reddit, because the whole system is set up that whenever anyone in your community produces something good, that is the context in which you will have least control over your culture. Because you have this Reddit front page, like the way a subreddit works, is like you have the subreddit that like most of the time its activity is only visible to the members of the subreddit. But then when anyone produces something popular, it shows up on a Reddit front page. And now all of these people who are from a completely different community, just like get shown your content, they show up and their votes matter just as much as the votes from your community. Right. And so whenever there's this high visibility event where in some sense you might expect norms and praise and various things to get set, in that context, actually, the members of your community can't do anything because they get completely drowned out. Whatever the Reddit mob
swamped by the masses. Yeah.
That's right. And so one of the key things that like was one of the earliest things we did was we just gave vote weights to different users. Yeah. So one of the earliest things that we did is just like we split the vote into, you can vote on something in a weak way, it's a weak upvote, or you can vote on something in a strong way, which is strong upvote, when you just hold and then you kind of have to hold for a while. And then your strong upvote just has a huge range of how powerful it can be, where just like, a new user shows up, has a strong upvote weight of 1, it makes no difference whether they small upvote or strong upvote something, because they don't really have the discretion to do anything different. But if you're someone who has been on the site for many years, your weight is going to be 8, 9, 10. And so just like that creates much more of a sense of like, even as things get popular and things get high up on Hacker News, the voting continues, it's influenced because it's a really valuable form of engagement, and it's good to see that people can influence how things work a bit. But the established users and the people who have built kind of some trust on the site.
The sort of entrenching the inside community actually is,
That's right.
is important.
You have to if you're on the wide open internet, and occasionally the hordes start arriving.
Right, it's this defensive problem, right, against the eternal September, so to speak.
So that was definitely a big one. And then definitely, more recently, I've just been extremely happy about us having split like kind of the votes on LessWrong into approval and agreement. And that just like really felt to me. It just like at that point I felt like that even just already communicates like the whole philosophy, like not the whole philosophy, like a major philosophy of the site.
Right. It's like you're getting fine-grained about what kinds of epistemic feedback you're getting.
But also just like the quadrant of upvoted, strong, like upvote, disagree. It's just like such a great quadrant that like shows what we care about. We're just like, this is a place where we expect many people to disagree with each other. Yeah. And like we celebrate the disagreement and like we still try to like meaningfully arrive at the truth, but we understand that somebody can say something that many people disagree with that nevertheless I'm very, very glad about them having said. Right. And like in the last week, I'm currently in the middle of a comment thread where I'm arguing with some people about Richard and Go's writing. And I have like some really solid +20 comma, -70 agreement comma. Just like and I think there's something cool about just like, I can take pride in having written something that a lot of people are really glad to have read and also disagree.
Right. Yeah, well, I could ask about Richard, but that might be a bit of a rabbit hole. He's a great guy. I love him. But that's like software mechanisms on the platform itself. Was there anything you did socially around the norms of agreement, disagreement, kind of epistemic?
So one of the big things we did that had some software component, but was largely a social component, is just like, as I said earlier, the whole internet, kind of especially over that time period, was trending towards extreme ephemerality. And that's also just a big attractor. Like one of the standard things that happens as you have niche communities is they become very oriented around a marginal piece of work. And I think Chris Oler, like all the way back in 2015 around the time, was writing about distillation debt and research debt. We're just like, you have these ideas that everyone, like in most research communities and scientific communities, people are always encouraged to push forward the frontier of knowledge, but nobody is encouraged to like reconsolidate your knowledge, like come up with the correct name for something. Long-term incentives are often quite off. And so in order to push back that push towards ephemerality, we kind of instituted a like annual review process. And one of the things that was like, and this is still confusing to this day, is at the end of every year, we have an annual review where we review all posts that are at least 1 year old. So at the end of 2025, you review all the posts from 2024.
Right.
And so it's kind of this experience of just like, we look at posts and we look at the ideas that they contributed over a longer time horizon. We don't just like look, did they right now chase a fad? Did they say something that was very fun in the community? Did they successfully comment on individual, news-like events that were happening? But just like, did they contribute to something lasting in a substantial way?
And you go back and engage with what you said. It's like, maybe we forgot we had that conversation. Actually, it was really important and it connects to something we're doing now.
Or being like, everyone was super excited about that and that did not age well.
It just totally didn't pan out. Someone made a bad prediction. Someone made a great prediction. Like, that's a really interesting aspect. And
then kind of in that context, there was just like a huge amount of social hustling of like, we got people to write reviews of just like, how well did this work age? And just like tons of people, we gave up big prizes. Like every year we gave like $20,000, $30,000 to just like across the reviewers to like as prizes of who wrote the best reviews. And then we had a vote and we thought a lot about a voting system and we like dug deep through like the mechanism design literature and we build a quadratic voting system where just like people have points and they have to assign those points across all denominated posts that year. And the more, like you can vote on a post, but the more you want to upvote that post, the more you have to pay.
Yeah.
So it's like if you want to give it +1, that costs 1. If you want to give it +2, that costs 3. If you want to give it +3, that costs 6.
Yeah,
and just like every marginal point costs linearly more. And it proves quadratic voting. And that's just like, we thought a lot about a mechanism design, and that's like then we have a way of like aggregating which things are the popular posts, like the well-aged post in the year. And then we put a huge amount of effort into making literal physical books and like the design of those books. And I think that was really when, I definitely remember when we first put out those books, that just like to so many people, it's like, oh, that now now it feels real. Like now I believe that like we can make real intellectual progress on the site, which is also so silly, but I do think there's something.
No, it's something real. I mean, this is why we did it with Palladium, right? We put it in this physical format, this beautiful artifact, and it's like, okay, now there's something to show for it, right? Otherwise, it's just a blog, you know? And actually, I think you guys used the same
the same printers, that's right, the same, not the same printers, but the same design team for the second year books that we had, Asimov,
I think you did a great job on that. Very interesting. I remember this was the early generative AI period, and like doing these like generative sort of rehashes of these maps.
That's right. We had like style transfers where we combined like the slight like Renaissance watercolor aesthetic with the scientific maps that we were using. And I'm still very proud of the design of those.
I thought that turned out really well. But maybe you've mentioned kind of this commitment to sort of do it even from a basement, but then you're also mentioning like handing out prizes. So at some point in here, we have this all important matter of funding. And so now I understand that, at some point in the rationalist community, certain members of the community became very successful, but why don't you tell the story about how this project ended up actually sort of paying back in financial terms, or getting a budget to be able to do this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we like early on, I think the first grant that we got was like, I worked at the Center for Effective Altruism between 2014 and 2016.
Okay.
Kind of started the EA Global Conference after Leverage had started the EA Summit. And then they started a new project called EA Funds, and we were actually one of the first people who got a grant from that. So it was kind of a direct, like, there were some people who had a long-term professional relationship with who are now in a position to just like, they contacted a bunch of retail donors who just like were excited about like, I think that was from the Long-Term Future Fund already. I'm not quite sure. It was like a fund that was dedicated to like figuring out how to improve the future, and they gave us a grant. And I already remember being like, I think they gave us an $80,000 grant for like, I think there was like a whole year of work for like, me, and I think Ben Pace was already working with me back in the day. And there's like so many people who left comments being like, how can you spend $80,000 on a website? How can you?
I know, I'm thinking now, like, only 80,000
That's right.
two guys working on this full time?
That's right. It's just like every time it's like, yeah, man, how do you spend $80,000 on a website? Ask Mark Zuckerberg. This is a lot of stuff to do on a website, bro. Building like the best modern internet online forum software, like, turns out costs more than $80,000, especially if you want to pay anywhere close to industry salaries, which we did not. I paid myself $40,000 that year, if anything at all. I don't remember.
And that's actually always been one of the strengths of the rationalist and EA communities, is that willingness to like eat dirt for a while to like for the cause, right? And that's I think so many other movements and tendencies in society are very held back by that, like unwillingness to make personal sacrifice. And rationality and effective altruism really did put that at the center of the ethos, and that's very commendable.
And so, like, I think some of it is also just kind of the Silicon Valley startup
of course. There's the startup. That's part of why the startup community is successful, right? It's because they actually are willing to do that.
In the first 2 years, you're just like, yep, you're going to live off of ramen. That's life.
It's funny. It's not like that anymore. But
I mean, now definitely you can get valuations really quickly, and but I still know some startup people who are expecting to not really make anything in the first 2 years.
But that, I guess. Back to the funding question, how critical do you think that was to being able to do it?
I do think that early grant was just like really valuable and like really important. And I'm like, Yeah, I mean, I would definitely now pay. Like, if I could send money back in time, I would easily like incinerate $500,000 to like make that $80,000 happen. Maybe $1 million. Like,
Right.
yeah, and just like that was a huge multiplier, and just like extremely important for like anything in my life at the time.
Right.
Succeeding.
And I guess I'm interested partially just sort of from the dynamics of how these things get going overall. If you're going to build new communities, build new infrastructure, like there really has to be that element of like money getting injected at some point, because it can be very hard before it's really taken off to sort of get that, like, I don't know, market return or whatever. I think nowadays probably you guys have more funding, but in those early days, it's just this, like, the problem of, I guess, it's like credit in the economy, right? Like credit is this incredibly overpowered thing if you can get access to it early in the development. But it seems like one of the things that kind of goes on still in a matter of like American culture and intellectual culture outside of directly for-profit things is there's still this sense in which like there isn't really money available for new things.
Yeah.
When it's like once it's built up and become part of an existing patronage network or something, it's like, okay, people will fund it. But those early days are very difficult, and I just would love to hear more thoughts from you on that difficulty and the generality of that problem.
I mean, definitely, I do think, and that's kind of a development that I've just seen play out kind of over the following decade in effective altruism. Like, there's just so many, like, the thing that I've seen in society tends to be that, like, somebody, and I mean, science funding, I think, is like an extremely strong example of this, of just like,
right.
you look at the history of early science funding, and it's like a lot of enormous amount of judgment-driven people who like get to come in and they're like, I want to make a bunch of research happen. And I think Patrick Collison recently like released like, oh no, maybe it was like there was a big recent letter like by a bunch of people in the Trump administration about reforming industry and science. And
Right.
they had a bunch of quotes about like historical like approval processes for scientific grants, and they would be like, you would have like a bunch of people who were just empowered to like give out large amounts of scientific funding, and they would like review like a submission by someone for funding like on Monday. They would like come to an agreement on Tuesday. Like by Wednesday, the grant agreements were fully drafted.
That's not
by
how it
Thursday,
works
the money
anymore.
is being sent out. And just like you had this like early like high discretion, in some sense high trust, like relying a lot on personal relationships funding that then enabled these early projects to just like get money quickly out of the
personal
door.
relationships, personal judgment. Like even the story of that $80,000 that you got, that's
right.
That's not because the people with the money sort of saw the value in LessWrong. It's because the people who they trusted to empower to make that decision knew from personal experience the importance of this project.
That's right. And so just like that early funding like really relied on that early judgment-driven thing. And then a thing that I've just seen is like I've even seen just over the last decade, like tons of grant makers do that for a while, and then due to a mixture of adversarial pressures, of like people will then try to get into your social graces, like networking, like they try to just like sycophants start surrounding you if you give a lot of resources away with high amounts of discretion. There's just like risk aversion that sets in of just like you have a grant maker, the grant maker makes one like controversial grant. Somewhere in the process, somebody just like gets really freaked out, and then just like the organization and the grant maker accumulates scar tissue of just like, we have to have processes, we need to have more review, we need to be more conservative how we review things. We want to make fewer, bigger grants to organizations that can like give us all the information up ahead. Grant timelines, go from 3 days to 1 week to a month, 6 months, a year plus. And I've just seen all of those things happen over time. And so just like, I do think that it's just like an enormous amount of value that people get to do when like they tap into networks for the first time and distribute a bunch of money and distribute a bunch of things.
Does that almost speak to the value of the Mackenzie Bezos approach of just like dropping a ton of money at once?
I mean,
I know obviously her priorities are all insane, but
the key thing that doesn't work about that at all is I don't think she gave money to things she trusted. I think she maybe had like,
interesting,
at most like $50 million of things to give that she had any reason to trust. And after that, it was like blatantly obvious. She would just like be fascinated by the domain, just like Google which charity was active in that domain, and then just like dump like $20 million on an organization that just like was the best at marketing and SEO, and you're like, that's now you're in like very bad adverse selection territory. Like,
yeah, but so this matter of funding, obviously you guys managed to succeed at that. The rationalist community is very successful in many ways, having obviously been early and right on AI, on even COVID, like a number of things. And that obviously enabled the next big project, which is Lighthaven.
That's right.
Where, I remember back in Berkeley, there was the Rose Garden Inn, and then somehow the Rose Garden Inn became Lighthaven. You guys basically purchased it with help from your friends, who had by this point become quite wealthy. So why don't you give us maybe more of the story of how that happened? How did that get conceived? The idea of a physical campus, right? Like it's almost this crazy idea, or might have seemed like a crazy idea. It's like taking an internet forum and then like we're going to give it a physical campus.
It's like a pile of software engineers who are like, why are you suddenly getting into Berkeley real estate, developing $20 million properties?
Right. So how did that happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think the key thing is between 2016, 2017, and like that was 2021, we had developed LessWrong more and more. We had started also developing the AI alignment forum, which is kind of a sub-forum of LessWrong that was focused on
using
AI.
The same software.
That's right. And then we just did user interviews, kind of in classical Silicon Valley style. Like we reached out to our top office basically every week. We tried to talk to them. We tried to understand what we could do to make them more productive. And just over time, at the beginning, they were like, well, look, man, I want to get more people online to read my stuff. I want to have better tools. Like, why the hell do you not support LaTeX in these correct ways? I want my comments on my stuff to be better. I want more long-term reward in terms of things like the annual review. But then over time, they shifted towards this other thing where it's like, well, what I need are collaborators. Like what I need are co-founders. Like I want to myself start an organization that has a research project that just requires me to meet other people.
Right.
They were like people who were like, well, I actually just like at this point, I just like the issues that people had and that seemed to be holding them back from like producing like really good intellectual output were stuff that just were now in the physical realm, around meeting other people, around having really good work environments, about being part of a culture that just like isn't just about sitting in your room and writing comments to the internet, but wanting other people to just like get high bandwidth feedback about all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so then, roughly around the time when we noticed that, the pandemic happened. Right. That, I mean, I think in some sense made all of that worse, but actually during the pandemic, we did a huge amount of infrastructure work to try to, like, in some sense, it kind of bridged the gap between us as like a group of people that was facilitating a lot of online connection, which up until the pandemic was, largely limited to low bandwidth connection. And then during the pandemic, all the options that people had for high bandwidth communication were, gone. And so they started seeking online high bandwidth connection. And so a lot of what we started during the pandemic is there was this app called Gavatown, which was kind of a Pokemon clone, but for online meetings, where you would have kind of a tiny 2D map, and you would have a tiny character, and the character would just look like a Pokemon character, and you could like make custom maps of like where you would walk around on, and then you would have proximity chat. So you would just like have a tiny camera, and you would have a camera, and it would be embedded in a tiny window in the bottom right corner, and you would have your mic on, and so you would have this virtual space that you could just walk around in as you're stuck in your house and can't leave, and just like have proximity chat with other people.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah. And so we started organizing these like parties and debates and events in like our visual like tiny Gavatown world. Yeah. And we me and Ray like started going like really wild, and I think Ray did us a lot to credit. And just like we built this really cool, amazing virtual world where just like people got their own offices, and then they had their own offices that they could hang out with. Yeah. And we built like all kinds of Easter eggs and puzzles into the space, and people kind of often like, we now actually, there's kind of the sense of just like people would show up in our Gavatown world, and then they would like go on a half-hour walk as they like explore all the cool things that we build and like the physical, well, the non-physical, digital space. In that context, we got a bunch of experience of what it was like to facilitate higher context things in the infrastructure we built, and I also had some experience running EA Global and things like that.
So learning in simulation, so to speak.
And then at the end of the pandemic, there was actually a huge opportunity.
Right.
Because before the pandemic, kind of the Rationality and EA community and AI safety community, they had been spread, like there were of course a few hubs, but even in places like Berkeley, like people were spread all across Berkeley in different places, and people were spread all across SF and the Bay Area and things like that, and people had moved there. But actually, man, like before the pandemic, the Berkeley in-person social scene for the Rationality community was really very atrocious.
Really?
I'm just like, there were occasional house parties.
Yeah, I remember there was like group houses and stuff.
That's right. There were group houses, and group houses, they had some real culture. But if you were someone who would show up, there was like a single LessWrong meetup that would happen every week.
Right.
And it was just like the most like evaporative, cooled, just like the thing that would happen is like the people would show up, and the people who like were here for like serious reasons, they wanted to contribute to the community, they wanted to make real progress on air safety and stuff like that. They would like show up in the community, and then they would find kind of private pockets, and then they would successfully kind of no longer attend the meetup and instead go to the private pockets. They would sort of silo
themselves off.
But so that meant over like a decade of craft, just like the only people who would still be attending the meetups were the people who hadn't successfully found a community anywhere else in the Bay Area.
Right.
And that just produced actually just a huge barrier to entry where you'd show up and be like, man, all of these people are obnoxious.
Right. Well, it's adverse selection again.
That's right. You have this huge adverse selection on the central entry point in some sense where people show up and try to find community.
Right. Yeah. That's
and
terrible.
At the time, I was running group houses. I was doing some amount of in-person community work, but it was just honestly very difficult to like create something. And you had occasional parties, but everything felt very, it just felt very hard to onboard and very difficult for people to feel like they had a community to build something on top of and things like that. And things very spread out. And then actually, at the end of the pandemic, most people who had been living in the Bay Area or even other places in the world, they had moved out into places with usually a cheaper cost of living or just nicer to be in than SF and Berkeley.
Yeah, I also moved out of Berkeley at this time.
That's right. But that meant that as the pandemic was ending, there was like the highest mobility, like in terms of like of any time in history for our extended community. And so we were like, man, as the pandemic ends, we really need to be ready to just like actually build a physical hub.
Where are we going to land?
Where are we going to land? And then we can actually just pull everyone together. Like we can start dozens of new group houses. We can have like an in-person co-working space and like a place where everyone comes together and meets. And so we ran this event called SSS Sanity and Survival Summit, just kind of the earliest time when we could get the people to like accept being at a large in-person event after the pandemic.
Right.
And then we kind of brought everyone together, and they were like, oh man, it's so amazing to be like surrounded by like 70, 60 other people who like actually like I get to talk in person again, and I like really obviously share culture with. And then at the end of that, we were like, okay, I think we're going to build a campus. Like we're going to do something after this that brings everyone together. And so we started by building what we called the Lightcone offices. We announced that kind of right after the retreat, after we got buy-in from everyone, where we built an in-person co-working space in Berkeley. We actually just rented one floor of a WeWork and eventually another one. Where just like we rented out a whole floor and just like invited the people that we respected and trusted, and they had like a process by which you could get to join the space, and then that just pulled a lot of things together. Constellation, which now is still an active co-working space in Berkeley, did roughly the same around at the same time. We helped them get started, had a bunch of collaboration with them early on. And then that's kind of how we moved into the in-person space. Like first noticing that just like there weren't that many good marginal web development features that would make a big difference. Noticing getting kind of our feet wet in the pandemic with facilitating these high bandwidth spaces. Then building a co-working space. And then just like very quickly after that being like, well, first of all, this doesn't make any economic sense. Like, it turns out office space in Berkeley, especially if you're doing something that is more on a like month-to-month basis or short-term rental, it's just like more expensive than paying interest on a mortgage. And so just like we started like looking into the economics, and then I think co-working was just always kind of lame in a sense of just like, well, I want to have a space where I can run conferences, where I can sleep people, where people can become like permanent research scholars, and things can feel a bit more like you have a campus that you can aggregate on.
Right, and this crucial aspect of these curated in-person spaces where serious work is happening, that becomes a social hub that isn't adversely selected.
That's right, correct.
And so instead, as opposed to the meetup model where it's just like, whoever's kind of no longer has anything going on or they're new, they concentrate in those. But if you have an actual campus where the interesting work is happening, then the entry point can be the high value stuff.
That's right. Yeah, and so we built the offices, and then we kind of started looking at properties of what we could do something cooler. And so we first of all we considered moving to SF. Like we looked at a bunch of properties in SF. We also looked at a really, really cool property in the Presidio, We're just like, and then we kind of a whole team retreat in the Presidio. We like booked out like a fraction of the place that we were considering like moving things to, or like we had a hotel right next door, and then we like build like a fake website of like that people could sign up for to like get space at that campus. We had like dozens of user interviews with people. But it's just like during those user interviews, we discovered that people didn't want to move to SF. It's just too hard at the time.
Berkeley is somehow still rooted, despite all the pandemic mobility.
That's right. Like about 50% of people or something moved away, but the other 50% were just like in Berkeley, and it just like was too hard. Like people had partners, people had like relationships there, people had kind of grown roots, and it was just like pretty difficult to move that. My favorite crazy idea, which we explored for a bit at a time, was to just make a long-term plan to take over Treasure Island. It's just so cool. Like you're just like, I can't quite get people to move to SF. What if I get them halfway? And then you have that whole island is like completely underdeveloped. Like I do think there was like a cool alternative future.
Yeah, I mean that's maybe like another 10 years down the line if you get that time. Like, because existing in an already existing city is like Berkeley, much easier than like having to deal with the particulars of a place that's underdeveloped and doesn't no one live there and so on.
That's indeed why we didn't do it.
Yeah. So it ended up making sense. Get the Rose Garden in.
Yeah.
I guess how did that particular? This might be too much in the weeds, but how did that particular property happen?
Yeah. I mean, so the Center for Applied Rationality, which we were still fiscally sponsored with at the time, and I had volunteered with many years prior. They had actually run rationality workshops in the Rose Garden Inn, like all the way back.
They'd rented it out. So
2013, 2014. Yeah. And so I had known the property.
Right.
But then actually I did like the most boring mind-numbing work and like so many great things as a result of extremely boring mind-numbing work where I did a complete grid search of the East Bay. I just like went to Google Maps and I just like started at a street and I just went like on Google Maps, just like looked at every building.
Yeah,
and I was just like left to right because we knew really that we wanted a bunch of outdoor space. Like we wanted to feel like a physical campus, ideally with multiple structures. That just like in Berkeley really seemed to me like it would make the vibe much, much better than what we had seen so far. And then it just like that meant that like doing pre-screening on Google Maps became pretty feasible. And then we ended up with, I think, 4 candidates, one of which was the Rose Garden Inn, because it just had this whole courtyard structure. But it was also, there was a School of Theology up on the hill in Berkeley that like they were thinking of selling to a like retirement home company to develop into a big retirement home. And so we considered...
Was that big empty campus, the Clark Kerr campus?
No, Clark Kerr campus, that's so big.
That's too big.
That's UC Berkeley. That's their own thing. But that was just a specific school of theology. It's like just north of UC Berkeley.
Okay, yeah, I think I know the area,
Yeah. And then we considered trying, buying that. We reached out to a lot of architects who had experience with spaces. And then all things considered, we came back to Rose Garden Inn. But to be clear, we were like extremely startup-like. So it's not like we then made an offer for them. We were like, should we do something here? And then we just one day were like, wait, every single room at this hotel is currently available. So we just booked every room in the whole hotel.
Right.
And then just like ran a workshop like with 3 days notice.
Right.
That like we did 3 days later. It's just completely hilarious. Like we were thinking of like buying the space and we wanted to try it out and we just unilaterally without just like booked out all the rooms. And then we were sitting there in the courtyard discussing whether we should buy this place. And then just like the owner who was like the head of he's a hotel owning family, Amish Patel, who like owns like 15 hotels across the Bay Area, just like shows up in the courtyard and is like, what the fuck is going on? Why? Who are you? What are you booking out my hotel? Like, what's going on? And I was like, oh yeah, we actually would love to buy this hotel. And he was like, what? I'm so confused. What's going on? And we like had talked to our real estate agent, and she was just like, let me handle everything. Like she really was like, make sure that like you go through me or whatever. And he was like, fuck that. Just booked out his whole hotel, met the man in his courtyard. He was very confused. Yeah. And then we were just like, no man, I think we would love to potentially buy this place. I think we don't know yet where we want to buy this place. And then we negotiated that we would rent out the place.
Yeah.
And then not only did we rented it out for 3 months, And not only did we successfully get him to rent it out for us for 3 months,
Yeah.
we got him to agree that we could start doing renovations in his hotel. So we could get evidence about how difficult it would be to renovate his place
Right.
in the next 3 months. Which, like, I think was obviously a good deal for him because we were starting to renovate his hotel. But it was also just like such a crazy thing to be like,
Yeah, it's like, well, what are these guys going to do?
Random, like, 25, like these random 25-year-olds suddenly show up in my courtyard, tell me they want to buy my hotel, and then start bringing in construction workers to like rip out my floors and replace my bathrooms.
Right.
And so that was extremely hilarious. Yeah,
Right.
and then we learned, we did like during that 3-month test period, we like ran multiple workshops like with other people, just like to test it out. We ran like a big Slakester Codex meetup organizer retreat. We just like renovated some spaces and just like actually did the work of getting contractors in, seeing what it would be like, and then using that kind of like came up with a plan for what it would be like to buy the whole space, negotiated a price, and then found like, Jan Tallinn ended up backing a large mortgage for us.
Right.
Which like he provided us with the cash to like buy the property and do a good chunk of the renovations. And then he would have a secured claim on the property, and that seemed like a good idea.
Right.
And I think he was pretty interested in just having a more diversified portfolio, because just like a lot of his money was like in a few AI companies and in a huge pile of cryptocurrency.
Right. Yeah, get some real estate in
right.
there. Yeah, it makes sense. And then all your friends can make it an intellectual center.
That's right.
By now, I think actually, how do the finances work out now? Like,
I mean, I think we are now, we are breaking even this year. I think we're probably going to be like within $100,000 of breaking even without, and that's like doing a good amount of subsidies of just like events that we think like we like and we are doing.
Yeah. So you're subsidizing stuff, and nonetheless still
That's right.
still
It's
quite close to breaking even.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I think now it is solidly in the self-sustaining category.
Nice. Yeah. So I mean, that's like. That's a pretty epic story, right? From kind of early LessWrong, kind of this almost failure of LessWrong, to deciding to save it, revamping the online presence, building new website, and then through the pandemic, kind of realizing that you could and should build this in-person space, and now there's Lighthaven. Lighthaven is the new name of the Rose Garden Inn, and hosts all these great conferences, and I've been to events there. It's
and I think like
nice place.
Like it has become like even just like among Silicon Valley, like one of the places in the Bay Area. It's just like really, like it has just succeeded at being like.
Yeah, it's one of the centers. Yeah, so it's what's that like? That's less than 10 years of action there, and quite a growth trajectory. Are there other parts that you have planned, or other things that you've already done that I'm not mentioning?
That's right.
Like,
I mean, the big thing is
where does the story go from here?
I mean, I think we just launched like which kind of almost brings your whole question about funding full circle.
Yeah.
Because we just launched like in some sense, I expect it to become the third big project of our legacy, which is Lightcone Commons, which is a like funding coordination platform, where like we've been working with the Survival and Flourishing Fund for a decade, where just like we've been working with distributing a lot of Jan Tallinn's philanthropy. And in the context of that, we've been doing a huge amount of development of like algorithms and tools and websites and stuff like that to allow just like people who want to use their money in like the most effective ways towards their goals, to like find people that like they can trust, to find good opportunities for them, tap into their personal networks, just like distribute really serious amounts of money to like make the world better according to their own values.
Yeah, this is the S process system that Jan uses, that sort of to deconflict, so that as I understand it, the intention is basically that a bunch of trusted allocators can basically allocate money unilaterally without too much paperwork, but the process kind of deconflicts it. So it's like, if everyone thinks that this one project should definitely get, $200,000, but not much more than that, the process makes sure that happens. So even though they're giving the money unilaterally, it doesn't like stack up or something. But you're kind of taking that sort of idea, just like a software platform for allocating money efficiently and effectively, and opening that up to a wider community.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I do want to be like, look, man, I feel annoyed at the Survival and Flourishing, like calling this thing the S process. Such a complicated, a mathematical term, and I think Scott Alexander also in a recent blog post was like, and they aggregate everyone's preferences using a complicated mathematical process, like the simplest goddamn
No, but it
algorithm.
actually comes down to like a bunch of unilateral allocators.
It is. It's just like, I mean, the algorithm is like the simplest one ever. It's just like you have two people. They want to fund a project. Like, let's say you have two people. They both want to give away $1 million. They both want to fund project A for $500,000.
Yeah.
Then they want to fund project, B and C, and they don't care. They don't have the same preferences.
Yeah.
What it just means is just that if two people want to fund a project, they split the bill proportional to how much money they're giving away. So just like if you have two funders who are giving away the same money, they split the bill 50-50 on anything they both want to fund.
Yeah.
If you have two funders where one funder is 2 times bigger than the other one, they split the bill 2-1. That's
Right.
it. That's the whole algorithm.
Right.
It's nothing
and
else.
there's some math to like make it work in the edge cases, but basically
I mean,
that's
there really
it.
aren't any edge cases. Basically, you just like you have two philanthropists who want to give away $1 million. They just, what would they give away money to if nobody else was giving money to? Then
Yeah.
you just split a bill. You refund them the money because the other party kind of paid half of it. Then you just do it again. That's
Right.
it. You do that until it converges.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of the time, like, problems that seem like they ought to be solved by some fancy
That's
pants
right.
system, actually the best approach is just some dead simple.
That's
like,
right. And it's
simplest
just like
thing
a
that could
very
possibly
dead
work.
simple algorithm of just like,
Yeah.
if two people want to fund something, they fund it proportional to how much money they're giving away. This is like not even necessarily just. Is it fair? I don't know whether it's just and fair, but the answer is that
But it's
it's simple and
simple and
easy
it
to
works.
understand, and like everyone can agree that that's kind of a reasonable-ish way of distributing money.
Yeah.
And that's like important for getting these coordination problems solved. It's like not trying to be like, oh, we calculated all the ideal fairness that we would distribute, that you should pay of your fair share for this. It's like
Yeah.
your fair share of a project is just how much money, like your fraction, of how much you want to fund it, multiplied by how big you are this round.
Right.
But yeah, so we brought that algorithm, and now we just started kind of a big, like, allowing other funders to try to join that platform very easily, recruiting evaluators who just like are looking at a huge amount of different applications and organizations and like projects and trying to figure out how to distribute that money. And it's just like, I think, it's already been, we have definitely received an overwhelming amount of interest in joining. I think we're going to be giving away like $35 million in our first round.
Wow.
And it's intended to be a quarterly round. So right now, by default, we would be at $140 million distributed if like that repeats every round. And I
Wow.
think by default, we're probably going to be at like more than that. Like I think by default, we're probably
think
going
it'll
to be like grow. And so I'm like, I think if we don't mess up and we do a good job at actually like really implementing the lessons that we've learned in this branch of our work over the last decade, I think we will be distributing like $300 million or $400 million a year, like over 2027.
Amazing. So you mentioned earlier, though, there's these problems with like persistently kind of giving out money.
That's right.
where everybody comes out of the woodwork and starts trying to like squeeze themselves into the shape that they think is going to get like the money from your project. Do you have thoughts about how you're going to manage that kind of adverse selection problem or the spoofing and
So,
all that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key things is to kind of really allow funders to have an easy time bringing on new evaluators to empower. So just like you have these people who have their personal networks, and you have these people who like know what good projects are in a domain, and the whole process is oriented around a funder empowering them very strongly to like be like, if it was just you, like I'm asking for like your own personal take here, like how would you distribute money? Like how would you just give away your first $1 million, your second $1 million, up until $20 million? And then that's trying to really tap into a bunch of people's networks. And so we're going kind of pretty broad on just like, we're going to have 30, over time, maybe, I mean, I think at 100 things start breaking and we'll have to do some clever things, but we're going to have 30, 40 evaluators on this platform who are just like all going to be tapping into networks, being empowered to like make these pretty substantial grants. And just like, we're trying to make it so that instead of ending up in a world where just like you have these big foundations, and these big foundations will often then try to build these centralized anti-unilateral systems where just like the foundation needs to approve the grant and it goes through like 15 different boards and whatever.
Yeah.
It's like everything of what we designed is trying to counteract that. Like we try to make it so that just like you have a single evaluator, and those evaluators, most importantly, we are actively trying to recruit people who are going to be doing this part-time. Because we're trying to maintain.
You don't want like a professional grant maker.
I think a professional grant maker is a mistake for a career. I think it is the grant making space, especially in the domain that I tend to work in, which is like trying to figure out how to make consequences of AI be good, and like trying to figure out like how to raise the sanity waterline.
Yeah.
Those are very low feedback domains.
Right.
And so like if you're a grant maker, you're like another layer removed from the people who are even trying to solve these problems.
Right. I guess what you actually want to do is grab people from the domain
That's right.
who are trusted. It's like, oh, that guy, I know he's got the good network there. I know he's doing a lot of really good thinking about what needs to be done.
And just like, I know he's well respected.
Allocate $5 million, right?
That's right. I know he's well respected in the field. Like I can read his output, and he's spending most of his time like trying to make progress in the field and producing things like that I can evaluate and like see how those things pay off. And then you can easily bring in those people and empower them to make a good number of grants. Mm-hmm. But trying to do so in a context where they're also being given enough guidance by people who like have time to investigate, like, is this organization for real? Are these people just lying to you? There's definitely a skill of being a grant maker that you need to learn. And that's just like the other side of this coin of just like, everyone learns how to not get taken for a ride in their first year in grant making. Like you show up and it's just like, you understand like what does it mean for a reference to be good and what does it mean for a reference to be bad? Like the reference will, unless you're in a set of very narrow circumstances, never tell you that you shouldn't give someone money. The question is like, how do you figure out how to elicit the correct information from them? How do you just figure out when people are lying to you? How do you figure out how they exaggerate and try to pitch you on things? And so there's kind of a middle ground, and we're really trying to make it so that you can get these people with a strong track record, and you put them in a context where both we provide support and we provide them like with enough other people who have done enough grant making over time that they just don't make these really dumb mistakes. And I think that's like a system that has worked, for example, reasonably well in things like DARPA. Mm-hmm. Like when I'm thinking about like successful frontier science funding, I do think like the DARPA special projects model of just like you recruit someone highly respected in a field, you give them a 4-year tenure, you give them a large budget, you give them large amounts of discretion about how to distribute that funding. It's just like quite good. And that's like a decent amount of inspiration for how I would be going about
Right. And what about the sort of third branch of the problem? So there's it's sort of this three-way market problem, right? There's the funders, there's the allocators, and then of course there's the projects. Right. How do they end up in the system? Like, are they recruited by the allocators, or are they like putting themselves into some black hole of grant process, like speculative kind of grant application?
I mean, one of the key
How does
things,
it work?
I mean, one of the key, just like we just have by far the simplest application process of like any place you can apply for funding, I think, in history. Like you sign up, there's an application page. It's just like, what's your name? What country do you live in? What kind of organization are you? It's like, are you a 501c3 or an individual or for profit? Those are the only 3 required questions. Then what you get is here's a Google Doc. Basically, we have our own Google Docs like platform. Yeah. And just like, you can live edit this anytime. We don't care. Like, here are like 3 suggested questions that you can answer that like we have found to be helpful. Yeah. But just like, tell us why your project is worth funding in this Google Doc.
Yeah, but give us the pitch.
And then just like, we use AI to extract all the standardized data that we need from the data you have.
Ah, cool.
So we then just have AI systems that like figure out, okay, how much money are you asking for in different scenarios? Like, who is involved with this project and what's like their rough track record? Like all of these stuff that like, I think you end up with these 15 required questions that you have to fill out, and you have to figure out how to put your pitch into the right shape to fit into the required questions.
I mean, as a grant-seeking organization, I've had that position occasionally in the past. Like, it was always one of the most annoying things about grant applications was just like, okay, now I have to like spend a week or 2 like understanding your particular ontology of what you're asking for and like fit our project into it. And it's like, that's just a ton of work. And often for like, very uncertain payoff.
And like another key thing kind of the whole system is just applications are just fully optional in the system.
Right.
So like any evaluator in the system can just be like, and then I recommend that you give money to these guys. Like, they can just specify the 3 required questions.
We know who these people are.
That's right. I'm just like, if maybe it's an established charity or maybe an established for-profit or anything, they can just add that unilaterally. And then we'll show up at your door and be like, hello, we have $300,000 for you, and you can reject that if you want. But it just doesn't make sense to like have these standardized processes. Like, what's the point? Like, I think a lot of the point of it tends to be this organizational scar tissue of like something went wrong in the past,
No.
and now the organization really needs to ask about this one thing, because at one time when we tried to give a grant to someone in India, it was a giant pain, so now we need to ask everyone to do that, and then at the time our lawyers complained about giving someone a scholarship and then figuring out how to do that in a tax-deductible way, and so now we need to ask everyone whether they're doing anything that is scholarship, and at another time one of our donors got really angry about doing anything that had anything to do with high school students, so now we need to ask every applicant whether we're going to do anything with high school students or anything who are minors. And I'm just like, look, man, like these questions do not matter for most people. They're not important for the evaluators. They're just like this organizational scar tissue that just like keeps growing as a result of these risk-averse grant-making organizations. And we're just trying to remove all the potential ways where the risk aversion can seep in.
Right. And so you're trying to like, close the loop on the whole problem of funding to sort of enable hopefully more good things to come out of the community you've been building. By applying a lot of those same like rigor of epistemic norms and like institutional design norms and mechanism design norms to create a new kind of fundraising process.
That's right.
Interesting. Very
and
cool.
Another big thing that's like extremely, I think that's been among the more controversial things that we've done is just every evaluator just gets 2% of the money that is distributed through them. Just like strict fee. It's just like if you successfully distribute $10 million on behalf of any of the funders, you walk away with $200,000.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
And just like grant evaluation and figuring out how to make, how to give away like substantial amounts of money in a cost-effective way. It's just like a really difficult job. And it's been a domain in which just like there are approximately zero performance-based incentives. It's just like, it's the nonprofit sector, everyone gets paid. Like it gets paid nothing. And maybe if you're like the executive, like the CEO of like Coefficient Giving or something, you can get like a medium higher salary. Right. But like you're never going to be in a position where just like you have obviously demonstrated good enough judgment that you can like walk home with some serious money, maybe enough to just like actually hire your own staff, like make your own decisions, fund your own projects.
Right. Interesting.
And so just like that strict fee model. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. I think that's one of the diciest incentive settings things that we're doing. But I just think that like one of the worst parts of like all of philanthropy and all of the nonprofit sector is cost plus. Just like everything being based on like you run your foundation and like as someone who's like interested in building a grant maker, your incentive is always to hire more staff, bring on more people, figure out how to spend more money. Because the only way in which you can expand like your influence over the world is to like
be bigger.
Spend more.
Yeah.
Because nobody will ever be like, give you an endowment that then the executives of the company can spend unilaterally. And I'm just like, that's just a terrible situation.
Right. So that's, I guess that's the next the next step of your master plan, so to speak. I guess one question I'm very curious about then is like, having done all this, you can answer this two ways. Like, what would you do differently if you're starting from scratch today with like a new intellectual community project or something like that? Or alternatively, what advice would you give to someone who's like trying to start up new intellectual community or something productive, along these lines, maybe with different focus, different emphases? Would love to hear your thoughts on just like, how do we do more of this? Because I think we need more of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest mistake that I made, especially in the early years of like kind of the whole work on LessWrong and Lighthaven, was just like, I didn't have the courage to be a leader. And I think this is like extremely, extremely common in like the social organizing and nonprofit space in particular. Where just like, I think first of all, this like first showed itself in just like how I ran my organization originally. Where just like, I didn't think of it as my organization. Like, I think it was correct to bring people on board and be like, you're co-founders of this. But I was just like hesitant to call myself, like to be CEO. I was hesitant to make decisions on behalf of the organizations. I approximately in the early years tried to do everything by consensus. Making decisions as an organization, like even if you're trying to bring, or maybe especially if you're trying to bring very mission-aligned and passionate people onto it, consensus is just like a really, really terrible way to like lead an organization. And so kind of even internally in LessWrong, the early experience was just that like over the first 2 to 3 years, everyone just became very tired of doing anything. Because trying to get the organization to do anything felt like you needed to get everyone else on board. Then when you needed to get everyone else on board, people felt like every project proposal, every direction for the organization to go would be an opportunity for horse trading. And that's like what you see a lot in consensus-based systems. So it's just like suddenly every decision becomes an opportunity for someone to be a bit hesitant to agree with the decision in order to potentially get something else that they also care about getting done.
And it becomes this like n-squared negotiation problem.
That's right. It becomes this whole n-squared negotiation problem. But even just beyond that, just like this feeling of just like everything you're trying to do just becomes this thing that you need to get buy-in for. And so just like a few years into the organization, we just had a break, and I was like, okay, I actually just think we should run this organization like hierarchically. I'm just like, there's a CEO, I make the decisions. It is my job to like take into account everyone's preferences, and like we like kind of discussed like nonprofits unfortunately don't have equity, but like kind of spiritual equity.
Right.
And be like, and like I think everyone should get roughly equal equity, but I'm just like, I'm going to be taking the reins, and I'm just like, I'm going to be making decisions on behalf of us, and I'm going to be like doing that unilaterally without checking in with everyone. And that was just like essential. Like that was the only time when the organization started working and getting to do anything on purpose.
Right.
But I think that actually extended much further than just the organization. Like at the same time, kind of when I look at the failures of most intellectual communities, like the success of I think like both Lighthaven and in some sense LessWrong itself, and also things like the Lightcone offices, is often downstream of just like you notice that you're in a domain where you would like to create a certain culture, create a certain community, and just like everyone is hesitant to stick out as advocating or doing something that it can clearly be blamed for. And I think that was ultimately like a lot of the motivation for why I didn't want to act like I was the CEO of my organization, because if I do things that other people disagree with, then I can be blamed for it. And it's like,
well, there's also this like, you know, who are you to put yourself in charge?
Exactly.
Kind of
who are you
fear,
to put yourself
right?
in charge? And I think this is particularly true in just like communities that are like oriented around like scientific inquiry and intellectual development, which is like the rationality community is a giant pile of contrarians. Like it's it's very hard to like be meaningfully a leader of the rationality community, but just like having the courage to do it anyways.
Yeah.
And then like the biggest thing that I think that took me a really long time, and that was kind of the next step, was just that like you then therefore need to be out there and you need to make judgments and decisions all the time where they're visible by other people. And you need to be able to take the shit that other people will give you, and you really want to maintain, like you want to start, you want to be in conflict with other people all the time, and you want to show to other people that you can successfully navigate that conflict in a fair and just way.
Right.
And so just like the correct thing to do if you're trying to build an intellectual community is to like be out there, like put yourself in a position of authority over anything that you can govern, which in my case, because I kind of due to vote, I was able to govern and had the authority to govern LessWrong. But then just govern actively, govern with your own judgment, record your decisions, make your decisions transparent to other people, but just like make them a lot and make them fully on your own conscience of just like, I'm doing this because I think this is a good idea. This will over time get you to build trust, and then that gives you the leeway to actually start coordinating more and more ambitious projects with more and more different people.
Right.
And I think you just like see this with successful CEOs in like lots of other domains. Like, I mean, I have my own deep disagreements with Sam Altman, but it's very clear that he has a long history of like successfully pulling the deals together. And just like that history of pulling the deals together just then gives you more momentum to do more ambitious things, which then you can like use to get more momentum.
Building that track record.
And just like when I started, I didn't write many of my moderation decisions. I was kind of waffly and tried to make my moderation decisions like hiding behind abstract like procedures and things that didn't kind of make myself a locus of judgment that like could meaningfully be blamed. And just like when I started doing that, I just noticed how just like coordinating things in my ecosystem got better, and over time I became more trusted and was given more leeway.
Started doing what exactly? Like just more directly explaining your
like both internally to my organization, but then also kind of on LessWrong. It's like there is no, and I kind of had even a long essay that I wrote about this the other day, like there is no committee that makes moderation decisions on LessWrong. Right. And this is actually quite rare in online forums. Like almost every online forum like tends to be like, oh, it's really important that if you ban someone, that gets like looked at by 5 different other people because you don't want a conflict of interest, and you want to make sure that you give them due process and a lot of different things like this. And just like instead, LessWrong has maintained like a very strict like I am the head moderator of LessWrong. I will make decisions about who to ban, who to rate limit, who to ban from certain posts, who to like tell that they will be banned if they take a certain action in the future again.
Right.
And just like that is all done like directly accountably to me. And being comfortable doing that took me a really long time.
Yeah.
And just like, we had people, and I mean, like, God, moderating online internet forums, like, we just had people, like, there were many people I respected who tried working with LessWrong, like, in the early days.
Yeah.
Like Max Harm, someone who I deeply respect, he, like, trialed with us for 2 weeks. It was just like, those were maybe among the most stressful 2 weeks of my life. He was just like, he felt like constantly everything he was doing, he would just be like, about to be torn apart by like the LessWrong internet mob, and just like having the courage to like put yourself out there and like stand up to the mob.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a nest of contrarians.
Right.
It's impressive to have pulled it together and become a leader of it.
Yeah.
We've been going for quite a while now, and this has been awesome.
Thank you.
I feel much more like I have an inside story on the LessWrong story, the Lighthaven story, and excited to see where this fundraising or this funding venture goes.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for your thoughts on kind of how people, the problem of courage, basically, in leadership. I completely agree with that is an essential component. Would love to see more projects like this. So yeah, thanks so much, Oliver.
Thanks so much.